Hi, I'm Prashant Yadav. I'm the Director of Healthcare Research at the William Davidson Institute. We have with us today Daniella Ballou-Aares from the Dalberg Global Development Advisors. She's the Director of the North American practice of Dalberg. Welcome, Daniella.
Thanks, Prashant. Pleasure to be here.
So, Daniella, I think many of our students and faculty and the broader stakeholders of the Davidson Institute may not know as much about Dalberg. So it might be worth telling us a little bit more about what is Dalberg, what are the kinds of activities you do, some more about the genesis of how your firm started where it is today.
Sure. Well, Dalberg is a management consulting firm that is really devoted to raising living standards across the globe and addressing global issues, and doing that in a different way that maybe has been historically done by either public sector actors or NGOs. We believe that if you bring private sector approaches, private sector skill sets to addressing problems in areas like global health, climate change, increasing access to capital for small and medium enterprises, that you can really have a greater impact on those issues. So our team is made up of people who have experience with some of the top consulting firms, but also have policy degrees or experience living or working in countries across the globe, and are committed to finding innovative ways and helping organizations be more effective in their work to address development issues.
So when you say organizations, are you talking about UN agencies? Are you talking about private companies, all of them? Could you give us examples of how a strategy type consulting firm helps development through its advice to different agencies?
Sure. Well, let me give you an example. Let's take an example in global health, an area that we've done quite a bit of work in. In global health, there's been a large increase in funds available over the last decade to fight particularly HIV and malaria. And that money has gone through new organizations that really, for instance, the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB, and Malaria, now a multi-billion-dollar organization. And so as those resources have been deployed, there's been a huge need and opportunity to really think strategically, how do we spend those resources in the best way? So our involvement, for instance, in thinking about how do you improve access to AIDS drugs is at multiple levels. We might work with a funding organization that is deciding between multiple funding opportunities and thinking how they can best use that funding. Secondly, we might work with a pharmaceutical company who has a drug that isn't sure what distribution model will actually be most effective to get it into a country. And thirdly, we might actually do something like work with banks to say, how can we provide credit to those who are buying those drugs to actually enable them to smooth their supply chains and their purchasing of the drugs. So I think what we found is, whether it's in global health or in addressing climate change or in strengthening global agricultural markets, for instance, allowing farmers in Kenya to participate in the global market for fruit juices or mangoes, one, there's multiple actors that are part of the solution. You might have a UN agency that is helping build the framework for improved access to medicines, or creating opportunities for smallholder farmers, but only if those organizations now, or those, let's say in the agriculture example, those farmers actually have a buyer and an international company get involved, would that activity be meaningful? And in all of those cases, only really well-informed decision-making by the companies, by the international agencies, that is based in knowledge of the local context, the local needs. Only with that information will they make good decisions. So I feel privileged that we've been able to work with multiple actors in many of these markets to help them be more effective and ultimately, hopefully, change the world.
Okay, this is fascinating. So at the Davidson Institute, we think about applying business knowledge to improve emerging economies and everything that you said, I think is very close to using business knowledge to help both UN, multilateral organizations, and also private sector organizations in the field of development more broadly, but global health, climate change, access to capital. I think a lot of times when we talk about capital markets today, there is a negative sentiment in the UN agencies about capital markets and the capital markets about UN agencies. You know, the two of them think of each other as very different ideological ways of approaching problems. And I know that your firm has done work where it brings together some aspects of capital markets to help UN type of agencies, you know, deliver better on their objectives and outputs. So could you give us an example where the two come together to make development happen?
Sure. Maybe I'll give two examples and capital markets being a very broad term, but you know, access to capital, commercial capital, can play a really positive role in development efforts when used in a relevant way. So one example, right now we are working with a series of experts across the globe with the World Bank, the Gates Foundation, and others who are looking at what kind of new financing mechanisms in agriculture would help create development of products and supply chains that actually helped smallholder farmers in Africa better participate in the world markets. And one of those areas, not only smallholder farmers, but local companies as well. And so one of those areas that really needs investment, including commercial investment, for instance, is fortified foods. And so in that case, without some commercial investment in companies, in small processing companies that could serve local markets and provide fortified foods, which are critical to improving nutrition and health, you wouldn't actually achieve that particular health goal. So there you need the commercial markets paired with some donor funding and guarantees and other tools that you can use in commercial markets that can yield a great effect. The second example is something in health, which we worked on called the Pledge Guarantee for Health. And here we found that actually with buyers of health commodities, one of their big challenges, so you have a Ministry of Health who's buying, let's say, a contraceptive or a malaria drug and is using funding from various sources to do that, they would typically not have access to steady capital to buy those products. And so you'd have stockouts, you'd have high cost in the system, and by simply enabling them to access capital from their local banks, to get credit, trade credit, working capital, to purchase those commodities on a consistent basis, you could greatly increase their efficiency, but also increase health outcomes, because all of a sudden you wouldn't have someone who was suffering from malaria unable to access that drug. So bringing together, I think, you know, something that we have the opportunity to see because we're working across sectors so much is some opportunities that maybe neither side would see. But when you bring them together, they can provide real value to each other in unexpected ways sometimes.
So in the current economic times, we hear a lot about development aid and development expenditure being cut severely, and many agencies, both bilateral and multilateral, thinking about how to do with very little. So how do you see your firm's role in this new climate where development aid is going to be much smaller than what it was before? And how are you advising some of these agencies to make sure that they can function even with a very limited resource envelope available?
Yeah, it is a challenging time, and you know, I think I like to be optimistic about what that means, and I think the positive lens, and there's a downside too, the positive lens says, okay, let's really figure out the ways to do more with less and use new, more efficient, innovative ideas to do that. So where we used to have a lot of funding, for instance, to deliver a drug to a certain country, now maybe we actually have to think about how we can bring finance, push in lower costs, make the supply chains more efficient, enable that drug to get there in a less costly way. And I think to some extent another thing it can enable is kind of forcing more collaboration. You see a lot of duplication of effort that has happened, and not for bad intentions, but because there was new resources, new ways of doing things. I think this is going to force organizations to work together, to consolidate efforts, and that's something we've seen starting to happen already. Collaboration where you had competition. The downside is if you go too far, of course, is that you're going to have a lot of risk aversion, actually, because people have so little money to work with relative to the need. They're just going to kind of do the things they knew well before and not try anything new. So I think we're trying to make the case to clients who are facing that situation that actually, in these times, it's the time to be innovative. It's not the time to just avoid risk at all costs. I think that's resonating, at least in some quarters.
What would be a message to young students and those who are just starting their career in the field of business and development, or at the cusp of using business knowledge for making development happen? What are things they should do, they should not do? Any kind of advice you would have for young professionals in the field?
Sure. I mean, I think one thing, and as a business school graduate myself, I think I learned a great deal in business school, but one risk is there can be an orientation towards taking kind of the well-trodden path. Everyone goes to do banking or consulting or kind of a particular jobs, and I think if you really have a passion for working on particular issues or working in a really global environment, that you have to be willing to take some risks and have kind of your own strong feelings about what are the things that you're really going to enjoy, not what are the things that are the kind of most typical thing to do or the easiest to do. So I think kind of finding that your own center of what you want to do and how you might get there. And while you're in graduate school, which is a great opportunity where you have more kind of time and resources on your hands than you typically do, take the opportunity to meet all different people who share that interest, not only in the business school, but outside and in organizations, do external, in your internships. I think WDI, for instance, is that kind of resource that students can use to plug them in to the broader community of individuals and organizations who are working on this issue. So seize that opportunity, find your own path. And, I guess the practical third one is, at the same time, make sure you have kind of built a core basic skill set that's strong. And that's something you can sometimes get in larger organizations because a lot of the work that we do, and you would see in this area, is a bit more entrepreneurial. You're trying to do things differently, so you won't get maybe the training you would get in a large organization. So make sure either before business school or immediately after, you get some of that core skill set and then use that to do other interesting things.
Very good. Thank you for your time, Daniella, and we wish you the very best in your firm's excellent work. And we look forward to working together with you.
Great. Thanks, Prashant. Thanks for having me here in Ann Arbor.